Support for podcasts comes from Milwaukee School of Engineering Center for Professional Education, offering courses in AI machine learning, project management, and more. Program information at msoe.edu/CPE.
From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Lake Effect. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Today we'll learn what impact new data centers could have on Wisconsin's utility landscape and infrastructure. Then we'll learn about changes to the Milwaukee County Transit bus operations.
There's going to be no lines that are going to be eliminated as of January. There are going to be some segments of routes that will be trimmed back.
Plus, we'll speak with this year's Milwaukee Youth Poet Laureate.
This role is just a way for me to reach out to people who are like me, who are really quiet, who sometimes don't really know what to say. And it's to show people that you can express your emotions through writing.
All that's coming up on Lake Effect. This is Lake Effect from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Thanks for joining us. Massive data centers are coming to Wisconsin to help power the global boom in artificial intelligence. The data centers will add demand for electricity and water, and this comes after years of declining usage of both here in Wisconsin. So how might that impact Wisconsin's electricity and water infrastructure? To find out, WUWM's Mayan Silver is joined by Tyler Burns. He's the Senior Research Associate for the Wisconsin Policy Forum, which recently released a report on data centers and utilities.
Tech companies are investing billions into the construction of data centers in Wisconsin. The data centers store and process data, and there are currently at least 40 data centers operating in the state, with more in the works. They're going to add a lot of demand for electricity and for water to cool equipment. But this comes after years of declining use of both in Wisconsin. Can you explain how data centers and that declining use interact?
So data centers do use a lot of electricity and quite a bit of water. And over the course of the last 20 years, we've seen declining demand for electricity dropped about 9% in total electricity use and a couple of percent in terms of one-time electricity use. And so because data centers use so much electricity, there isn't really capacity in the system to supply the electricity that these data centers need, because we've been sort of expecting electricity to continue to decline, and so there's been generating capacity. The ability to generate more electricity has sort of come out of the system as things like coal plants age and become more expensive to operate and more expensive to rehabilitate. And so, the electricity demanded by these centers is going to cause the need for increased generation capacity, so the ability to generate more electricity, both over the course of the entire year, but then also, more importantly, at one specific time. And so, electricity generation tends to sort of peak when everybody's using their air conditioner, everybody's at work, and it's that peak demand that these data centers are going to be more impactful on, because they use electricity pretty constantly. So that demand's always going to be there.
Okay, so that's the electricity picture. What can you tell us about data centers and water?
On the water side, the story's a little bit different. So statewide, we sell billions of gallons of water utilities, the Madison Water Utility, Milwaukee Water Utility, the people you write your Milwaukee Water Works, the people you write your check to for your water bill. They sell hundreds of billions of gallons of water each year. And so, these data centers use a lot of water, tens of millions of gallons, and that sounds like a lot, but Racine's a really good example. In the context of Racine, the new Microsoft data center, when it's fully built out, is expected to use about 8 million gallons of water a year. While in 1997, the Racine Water Works, who provides water to that data center, sold 2.1 billion gallons of water. And so, 2.1 billion gallons versus 8 million, it's just a different scale. And so, because these data centers, they do use a lot of water, but there's a lot of excess capacity in the water supply system in many places in the state. So, there's more slack in that system. Now, that may be different in particular communities. That may be something that people need to look into. But generally speaking, statewide, there's more capacity in the water generating system to meet the demand of these data centers than there is in the electricity generating system.
What does that mean for the electricity generating system in Wisconsin?
So that means that we're going to need to add, at least as projected by utilities, they're going to need to add additional capacity to generate electricity. And what that means is probably new power plants. And because it's a relatively even, steady load, it's likely going to need to be power plants that operate on an even pace, which means things like gas plants, because if you think about solar and wind energy, that sort of tends to fluctuate over time. The amount of energy generated when it's sunny out is more than when it's cloudy or when it's dark. And so, that's what's driving the utilities to look into investing into gas plants. And, there's other factors that are driving increased demand, just population growth, electrification of cars that are also sort of contributing to that. But the data centers seem to be the driving factor. In addition to potentially adding generating capacity, it's likely that there's going to need to be some additional transmission, so power lines and things like that, to get the electricity from where it's generated to these data centers. And, the size and scope of that transmission capacity depends on the location, right? If there's a center located a long way from a power plant and there's no existing power lines to get there, that's going to be more expensive than one that's located at a site that has in the past had a lot of electricity use. And so the amount of money that needs to be invested in the transmission again varies by community, where these things are located, geographic factors, those sorts of things. But the concern is that there's going to be all these added costs, and there's concern about who's going to pay for them.
I'm WUWM's Maayan Silver, speaking with Tyler Burns of the Wisconsin Policy Forum. Okay, so on that note of the economic impact, can you explain who pays for building more power plants and why this matters?
Yeah, so in Wisconsin, electrical utilities and water utilities are regulated by the Public Service Commission. And so what that means is that when your utility needs to change rates, they need to ask for permission from the Public Service Commission. And there's a review process. And the idea is that customers should pay for the electricity or the water that they're using. In response to these very large users, We Energies has come up with a proposal for a different rate for these very large users that's intended to ensure that they're paying for the costs associated with what they're using. And so the transmission lines, the generating capacity that's associated with this increased demand, the intention of these rates is to make sure that they're paying those costs. In addition, there's a couple bills in the state's legislature that are being considered and recently introduced that will also, the intention of those bills is to make sure that those costs are paid by those users. Now, it's difficult to design policy if state legislatures could do everything they want and get it right every time. We live in a different world maybe, but the intention of both these rates and these bills are to make sure that the users are paying for those added costs.
And on that note, your report says that it's important to ensure that the potential costs are fairly distributed and that, local and state politicians are looking into this. Why is it important to keep sufficient data on how these centers are putting pressure on the state's energy and water infrastructure?
Yeah, I think, the reaction to, the specific sites, I think speak to the public's uncertainty about these new developments. They feel the pressure of increasing costs for electricity, and they're concerned what the impact of building data centers is going to be on their electric bills. And so, some added transparency in that area, might demonstrate to folks that, yes, actually these costs are being paid. When people sort of assert something, it's nice to have some hard data behind that assertion to be able to say, okay, yeah, I can see it. And there's a little bit different expectation for transparency between sort of government actors and the private sector, right? We don't we don't have an expectation of transparency to see the payrolls of every private company, that sorts of things. And so I understand the hesitancy to share these data. There's trade secrets, all those sorts of things. But then also, again, given the response that people have had to these data centers and the uncertainty around what they're going to do to things like electric bills, water bills, et cetera, it may be wise to consider increased transparency in that area. And again, at Policy Forum, we're sort of generally pro-transparency. And so, I think that's one of the reasons we pointed that out in our report.
Is there good enough data right now? And how, if not, who would change that going forward?
There's not very detailed estimates of how much one data center uses in terms of electricity or water. There was some reporting done by someone on individual data centers that are operated by Meta, and that's kind of what I used for some of the estimates in this report. And there does seem to be pretty solid estimates of the aggregate amount of electricity used by these data centers. The Berkeley National Energy Lab produced a report that had both sort of current data and then projections for the future, but that didn't have individual data center reports. And so it is difficult to find concrete data on both exactly how much electricity these will use over the course of the year or at one time, and exactly how much water they'll use. And so we're dealing with uncertain estimates as part of this conversation.
And we've been talking a lot about the electricity demands, but I'm wondering, back to the water utility companies and how those interact with the data centers. You wrote in your report that there might be some water quality concerns associated with using so much water for data centers, but that those concerns also exist for many other large users, like a paper plant or a cheese factory you mentioned. Why might those concerns be limited when it comes to data centers?
The plan for data centers and that the new sort of cooling mechanisms are designed to be closed loop, and so there's not a pipe that's discharging that water into surface waters or groundwaters. Instead, most of the water is intended to be recirculated, kind of like a radiator. And so, there's going to be water quality concerns anytime you're building a large facility. If you're creating more impervious surfaces, so there's that. And eventually, this water will be discharged in some way or evaporated. And so, any large water user, if you're sort of using it and discharging it, there's likely to be some impact on surface waters. And again, most of it is intended to be recirculated, and so it's a little bit less concerning.
And why might increasing the water use, as you were talking about, that the data centers bring more demand for water utilities, why might increasing that water use actually benefit customers?
So when you're operating a waterworks, you have to clean the water, you have to pump the water, you have to store the water, you have to have pipes, you have to have people operating the system. A lot of those costs don't change based on the amount of gallons of water you pump. And especially if you've built your system, to service a bunch of large industrial customers which are no longer there. That means that each gallon of water that you sell has to cover more of those fixed costs as sales decline. So if you sold 1 million gallons 10 years ago and your costs are about the same, but now you're selling 500,000 gallons, each gallon of water has to cover twice as much of those fixed costs. And so if there's a large water user that's buying more, now you have more gallons of water to spread those fixed costs over. And so, potentially that will help cover those fixed costs a little bit more. And we've seen water systems where, they had industrial customers and those industrial customers left, and they had to raise rates so high that they couldn't really, the users of the water couldn't really afford to pay for the system. That is at least part of the story of what happened in Flint, Michigan. And so, these water systems were built to sell large amounts of water, and if they're selling smaller amounts of water, the customers that are supporting the system have to pay more.
And given that, is there like an underlying takeaway that people should come away with based on this report?
I think going forward, it makes sense to be careful about making these long-term investments in the state's electricity grid and the state's sort of business environment. One thing to keep in mind is that if we'd have made projections 10 years ago about what electricity use is going to be now, we'd have said, well, it's going to continue dropping. And so, you're making decisions based on that. Right now, it looks like in the future, over the next 10 years, demand is going to go up because of these data centers. But if that demand doesn't materialize and we make all these investments, then there will be bigger questions about who's going to pay for these investments in new generating capacity if that demand doesn't materialize. And so, we always need to be careful about making big projections for the future because that's very difficult. I think that's something that as folks are making decisions about this, we need to consider what happens if that demand doesn't materialize. And that's something we point out in the report. And I think again, a 5-year projection, a 10-year projection, 15-year projection, that just gets more and more difficult. We don't know what the future is going to look like. And that uncertainty is something I think we should consider.
Well, there's a lot to dig into here, and you've said that you'll be keeping track of these data centers and their impact on Wisconsin going forward. Tyler Burns of the Wisconsin Policy Forum, thank you so much for speaking to us about this.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, and anytime we can help out, we're happy to.
Tyler Burns is a senior research associate for the Wisconsin Policy Forum. He spoke with WUWM's Maayan Silver. Starting this week, some bus riders across Milwaukee County will need to wait longer for their rides, especially on the weekends. That's because the Milwaukee County Transit system reduced service to some routes to help deal with a multi-million-dollar budget deficit. Regular fares also went up by 75 cents at the beginning of this year. To learn more about the changes, WUWM education reporter Catherine Kokel is joined by Jesus Ochoa and Brian Deneve with MCTS.
Let's start with what people need to know about these changes. First off, fares increased at the beginning of the year from $2 to $2.75 per trip. The reduced fare is up to $1.25. There are also some changes to routes that started earlier this week. They're called targeted changes to route frequency. Can you briefly walk through what types of changes riders will see, Jesus?
Yeah, so riders should expect to see some frequency reductions across 16 routes in this winter service change period. So, buses may come a little bit less frequently than they have previously. Some riders may wait 5 to 10 minutes longer than they used to wait if they're on a particular route. So there's 16 of those across weekdays, Saturdays, and Sundays. The other big change is that for 6 routes, the Route 20, Route 28, 33, 34, 55, and 58, those routes will only operate in the morning time periods and the afternoons, roughly around 6 a.m. to 9 a.m., and then 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. So riders should really expect to pre-plan and know that service between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. will no longer be there.
Kind of the morning rush hour and the afternoon rush hour, right?
Correct.
Okay. And this is the first phase of changes to routes. We're going to see more in March, correct?
That is correct. So starting on March 8th, we are going to make some modifications to 5 other routes. So parts of those routes that tend to have lower ridership will no longer have bus service. So riders on those routes should really, take a look at our schedules and prepare for those changes coming up in March. We really wanted to give a little bit more time for our riders to learn their new trip patterns. So that was the big reason for starting those a little bit later versus starting them in January.
And so fares went up at the beginning of this year. Do we anticipate them going up again this year? Brian, I'll let you answer that.
The fare increase that took place beginning January 1, 2026 was actually part of the budget cycle process for the annual Milwaukee County budget. So was first discussed and deliberated upon last spring and summer. So I don't anticipate any increases in fares going up in 2026. There may be discussions of the following year that taking place, but as of now, I don't anticipate that happening.
Brian, we're going to stick with you, I assume. MCTS has a $14 million gap in its budget because it doesn't have a dedicated source of funding, right? How will these changes help address that budget deficit?
Sure. So the $14 million budget deficit was for the 2026, all of 2026 that was anticipated for the year. And so there were a few different ways that we were able to take steps to close that budget gap. One was $9 million that was part of the county executive's budget that uses ARPA funds. So that's COVID relief funds that were still remaining. And then there was nearly $5 million, roughly $4 million that came from the county board as part of a budget amendment that they were able to add in to what was the final adopted budget. And so since then, we've just been looking to do the targeted route changes that would affect kind of those lower ridership points on specific routes, because ultimately every time you put someone in a bus or a bus operator run that bus on a specific route, that's obviously a cost. And so we looked at these very strategic changes on the routes where they had the lowest ridership in order to make sure that we were really operating within our means.
I'm going to take a moment here just to reintroduce you both. Today we're speaking with Jesus Ochoa, the Director of Service Development at Milwaukee County Transit System. We're also hearing from Brian DeNeve, the Director of Marketing and Communications for the transit system. Jesus, I'm going to go to you. I'm the education reporter, so I'm always thinking about how changes will impact students. We know a lot of students in Milwaukee public schools take the bus to school, as well as obviously UWM and Marquette students. Most of the major route changes are happening on the weekends. At least most of the major wait time increases will be happening on the weekends. But if I'm a student taking the bus to my campus, what should I know?
Thank you, Katie. That's a great question. We do serve our high schools, universities really well with transit. Transit's vital. We heard a lot from our MPS students during the budget process of how important and vital this service is, which really led to a lot of the recommendations in our plan. So I would let students know that whether you use one route, whether you use two routes or three maybe to get to school, definitely take a look at our schedules. We have previews on our website to really know what your new trip pattern is. Really utilize our real-time tracking, our trip planning functions through our UMO app to really gauge what alternatives could be out there for certain times of day. There are a lot of changes that are happening on the weekends, but there are some substantial changes happening during the weekday that will impact students. So definitely take advantage of the resources we have online and keep up with what we're doing this year.
If I could add, we do look at the bus as being, a major opportunity for mobility and for people to get around. But there are other opportunities, especially for college students that are comfortable or able to utilize, whether that's just walking an extra block or two. Obviously, we have a very robust bike share system through the Bubbler network in the city of Milwaukee and beyond. And then, of course, the DACA scooter program, which is very popular here. So, there's probably opportunities for exploration of other modes of transportation, especially for those younger riders or students that are able to use those.
Jesus, you're kind of the route specialist, right? Are there any schools that are going to lose service in this phase of the changes?
No, that's a great question. So part of this entire budget process and in the strategic analysis that we did was to try to preserve as much service as possible. So originally we were slated to eliminate 6 routes. There's going to be no lines that are going to be eliminated as of January. There are going to be some segments of routes that will be trimmed back. However, the segments that are going to remain will continue to serve schools, right? So we're talking about the peripheries of the system, areas where there's a handful of riders during certain times of day. So we're really strategic in trying to keep the buses along the segments of these routes that carry the most people, right?
Excellent. So public transit experts would say that increasing frequency and adding more routes is usually the way to get more people to ride and thus make more money. But that's not really possible, right? With a budget deficit. So what is MCTS's philosophy when it comes to serving the community while also staying afloat? Brian, I think that would be a good question for you.
Certainly. So MCTS's philosophy really is we can be a resource and an option. You look at two different types of riders generally. Those who do it by choice. Maybe they own a car or they have other ways of getting around. They can afford possibly an on-demand Lyft service. And then you have those riders that really solely rely on the bus for getting around. And so there's still an opportunity very much for Milwaukee County Transit System to appeal more to those choice riders. I mean, we are maintaining routes throughout 2026, and there's opportunities for people to look at the bus as a possibility to, go somewhere to an entertainment destination or an event, or to go shopping on, especially on some shorter trips where there are commercial corridors and a lot of great places to visit throughout the city of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County. So we do feel that regardless of these changes in service, I'll be doing my best, and then the organization will be doing its best to continue to encourage people to take a second look at the bus if they haven't ridden in a while, or try it as a new thing, and perhaps you'll have a positive experience moving forward and will return with us.
And if I may add, Katie, high frequency is king in transit. It's across the nation, across the world. And it's no different here in Milwaukee. Our high frequency routes that come every 15 minutes or better, they carry the most riders. 73% of all of our rides are on those high frequency routes. So it really shows that if you can make transit convenient, people will use it. And that's something that we really took into consideration as part of this plan. A deficit's going to impact riders regardless, right? So how can we preserve as much of the high frequency service as possible to keep us sustainable?
Yeah, thank you. I will also point out that both MCTS and now WUWM's website have a guide that can tell you exactly how many minutes a rider can expect to wait longer as a result of these service changes. So all of that information is both on the MCTS website as well as our story at WUWM.com. So if you're interested in route-by-route information, it is available online. Thanks so much for speaking with me about this today. I think these are really important changes that riders should be looking for.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Jesus Ochoa is the Systems Director of Service Development, and Brian Deneve is the Director of Marketing and Communications for the Milwaukee County Transit System. They both joined education reporter Catherine Kokel. Milwaukee County Transit is a financial supporter of WUWM. Lake Effect is available as a podcast, so you can listen whenever you like. Find it wherever you get your podcasts, then subscribe, download, and hear us on demand. In about 15 minutes, we'll talk about Quick Trip and how the gas station chain became a beloved Midwest institution. But first, we'll meet Milwaukee's new Youth Poet Laureate. Keep listening to Lake Effect on Milwaukee's NPR. You're listening to Lake Effect on WUWM. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Every year, Woodlawn Pattern selects a Milwaukee Youth Poet Laureate through a competition. Last summer, the local nonprofit crowned Angela Wang with the literary honor. She's a senior at the University School of Milwaukee and wraps up her service this upcoming May. As Youth Poet Laureate, Wang shares her poetry across the city and helps to guide other young poets through writing workshops. Lake Effect's Excrit Nunez talks with Wang about what inspires her poems and what she's learned in the year-long role.
Angela, I understand that you brought a poem with you today, and I was wondering if you could start by sharing it with us.
Yeah, of course. So this poem is called The Storms That Tie My Family, and I've read this poem a lot, but I never get tired of it because it's about my grandmother, my mother, and I. And kind of to give a little bit of background, my grandmother grew up in China and she went to a school specialized for training teachers. So she kind of got put in there. She didn't really get to choose what she wanted to be. She wanted to be a surgeon when she grew up. Then my mom came along and she immigrated to the U.S. to find a better opportunity and then for me and for herself. And so this kind of pays tribute to the sacrifices that my grandmother and also my mother have made for me and for my future. In the large ocean of possibility, we rule. Amidst the vast depths of the basin, we forged our own path to a better future. We are 3 generations of women, interconnected by the resilience in our blood. We are 3 generations of women, blazing our own paths. We are 3 generations of women, each of our fights expanding the next. The grandmother merged lakes to form the ocean, crafting every detail with pride. The mother faced the sea, taking on the storms that attempted to keep her down. And as the daughter, we drew our strength from the waves that our ancestors calmed for us. From the swell of our breasts and the curves of our hips, to our silken black hair billowing in the stormy wind, we have long been kept in the water. We fought to keep our heads above the whirlpool, clawing against the waves that attempted to keep us down. We are workers, bearing the weight of our family on our backs. We are explorers, expanding the horizons for generations to come. We are learners, eager to absorb any wisdom we receive. Our thirst for knowledge created an unwavering ship, navigating the uncharted terrains. We are dreamers. We are believers. We are free.
That was so beautiful, Angela. I was wondering if you could share how this poem speaks to your identity or your life experiences. I know you prefaced it before the poem, but if you could speak a little bit more about it.
Yeah, so I'd say definitely like one of my biggest influences for my poems is my family and my culture. I think that as an Asian American, it's often like 2 sides of my identity. It's like being Asian, but then also being American. And both identities I'm very proud of. But sometimes like I really feel like I have to pay tribute to just all the stories that I've been told growing up. I think storytelling is a big part of my family, like both the real stories of my grandmother and my mother, but also like mythology. I think my most favorite story is about Niwa, which is who like formed the earth in Chinese mythology. And there's a lot of powerful just female characters in Chinese mythology that I really draw to. And I feel like my identity really, I kind of try to like emulate some of their characteristics. And so that's definitely what shaped me and then into my poetry as like my voice.
I love how you talk about coming from like a family of storytellers. And I'm wondering, where does your love for creative writing and poetry stem from?
Yeah, so I think growing up, I was a pretty quiet person, and a lot of the times I had so many like thoughts in my head, but I just couldn't really seem to find the opportunity to say them. And so that's when I really turned to writing. I had this like Hello Kitty diary that I would write in every single day, and I'd write about my day and like everything that I saw that day, everything I wanted to say but didn't. And slowly like those writings kind of turned artistic. I started writing stories, and then I found poetry in middle school, and that's when I really started exploring all the different forms of poetry and trying to find my voice through it. I think also then I realized like how powerful poetry can be, and that's really how I got into it and how I continue writing it to like express my emotions and also use it to like connect with other people too.
And Woodland Patter named you the 3rd Milwaukee Youth Poet Laureate. What does this role mean to you?
This role for me is just a way for me to reach out to people who are like me, who are really quiet, who sometimes don't really know what to say at what time. And it's to show people that you can express your emotions not through just speaking, but through writing. Like you can be seen and heard and understood in like, I guess, a silent language. And like, it's just to show other people who kind of look like me, who might act like me, that they're heard and they have a space here to kind of grow and to find their own identities.
I love that. And what are some things you've accomplished in this role or still hope to do before your time ends in May?
This role honestly has taught me a lot, and I'm really excited to keep learning and growing. I think I have an upcoming event where it's like a workshop on anger. I think that like anger and like these strong emotions, I mean, they influence my writing, and I hope that to learn from younger students. Like everyone has something to teach, and I'm here to listen about other people's experiences and maybe how they use poetry to express their emotions, and just to try out more types of poetry and maybe trying to expand beyond freeform and trying more like maybe haikus and seeing how my writing can fit in all these different places.
Yeah, and I know that it's been a busy year for you as Milwaukee's Youth Poet Laureate. You're also finishing out your senior year and transitioning to college later this year.
Yeah.
What are some of the issues you've been grappling with or writing about this past year?
Yeah, I think like these recent months, there's been like increased polarization of like two sides and their different beliefs. And I think with my poetry, I definitely tried to explore like what can we kind of connect on, like kind of taking from both sides and trying to like make them see that we're still all people. Just because we have these different beliefs, that doesn't mean we're enemies with each other. That means that we might have different views, but we're all still people who feel human emotions and have all these experiences that we can connect on. Like I think I have my own beliefs, and I do express them through my writing, but then I also use these to kind of show other people and see what are your thoughts and what can I learn from you and what can you learn from me. It's more about learning from each other rather than arguing or disagreeing with each other.
Yeah, that is so well said. And really another example of how poetry is an outlet, but also a way to connect with others. What do you hope people ultimately take away from reading and listening to your work?
I want people to know that they matter. I think when I was quiet and I didn't really speak, I thought I'm not able to speak because maybe my voice doesn't matter as much. My voice isn't as loud, so maybe my thoughts aren't as valid as someone else's who's louder than me. And poetry really taught me that your experiences are extremely valid. Like, I used to think I was a boring person, but after I wrote and I shared it with people, they're like, wow, I've never experienced this before. And so it's just to show people that everything that makes them them is unique. There's nothing that makes them just bland and boring. They should try writing and connecting with people because they'd be surprised how much about themselves that people would love to learn about.
Well, Angela, before we wrap up, I was wondering if you might have any advice for young creatives who want to get started in writing poetry.
Yeah, so I think a big struggle that I used to have, and I still have with writing, is getting started. I think not because I don't have like a lot of ideas, but just that I get so overwhelmed by so many thoughts. It's like, I want to write this, but I'm not sure if it's going to be like good enough. And I really recommend just taking just multiple sheets of paper and kind of like brain dumping. That's what I like to do. But I find that seeing all my thoughts on paper helps me organize them and maybe combine two ideas that are sort of similar and help me start writing. A lot of the times people think like perfection is good, but I think that creativity comes from chaos. Like all these papers is where like strong ideas would form. Another piece of advice is from these scribbles might come a poem that might not be successful, and that's okay. I mean, failures are part of the creative process and they really help move the creative process forward. I never cross out any of my supposed failed poems because I find that when I go back and I look at them, I can extract the things that I thought were really strong and then what might have like went wrong, and that really helps me strengthen my next piece of writing and help form new poems.
So let that stream of consciousness flow. Angela, thank you so much for speaking with me today and sharing your impactful poetry with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Angela Wang is a senior at the University School of Milwaukee and is this year's Milwaukee Youth Poet Laureate. She spoke with Lake Effect's Excrit Nunez. Milwaukee County High School freshmen, sophomores, and juniors have until March 29th to apply to be the city's next Youth Poet Laureate. You can find more information about that at wuwm.com. Ever found yourself waiting to exit the highway until you see a sign for Quick Trip? We'll learn why so many Wisconsinites often favor Quick Trip over other gas station chains. That's next on Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. You're listening to Lake Effect on Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. We all pick favorites, favorite shows, favorite books, but how about a favorite gas station? For many in the Midwest, it's Quick Trip. The gas station chain has over 900 locations across the Midwest and has created a cult-like following. But why? What is the big deal with Quick Trip? Archer Parquette is the managing editor at Milwaukee Magazine, and he explored that question for a piece in the magazine. He joins Lake Effect's Excrit Nunez to talk about the history of Quick Trip and what makes it so successful.
I want to start by asking why you decided to focus on the origins of Quick Trip. How did this story idea come up?
Yeah, we'd been thinking about doing something about Quick Trip for quite a while. To someone who's not from here, it might seem like kind of a weird thing that we have this devotion to what looks like just a chain gas station. Because, there are other chain convenience stores that also inspire followings sort of nationwide. An obvious example recently is Buc-ee's. In Philadelphia, there's Wawa. So we wanted to see what about Quick Trip is particularly Wisconsin and learn a bit more about its history.
So tell me more. Where and how did Quick Trip start? Was it always this gas station / convenience store?
It sort of started as more of just a grocery store, but a really small one. So in 1965, in Eau Claire, the first Quick Trip opened. John Hansen and his wife Donna were operating that first store. They went into business with a local company called Gateway Foods, and that was sort of how the guy who eventually became very much the face of Quick Trip, Don Zietlow, got involved. He sort of grew up as a farm kid near there. And then he started working for Gateway Foods, and he worked his way up, eventually becoming president of the company. But when Gateway's owner, D.B. Reinhardt, got involved with this nascent first Quick Trip location in Eau Claire, that was what sort of brought Don into contact with Quick Trip. Some of the folks at Quick Trip that I interviewed for this story, according to them, Don was giving a presentation at a conference for grocery store owners. And he was telling them sort of this pitch about big box stores are coming in and they're going to put you out of business because they're doing more than you're doing. They're selling more than you're doing. You're going to have to get smaller. You're going to have to become closer to what was then being termed a convenience store, which was still relatively a new business. And according to the story, one of the people in the room said something along the lines of, well, if you know so much, why don't you buy my store? And I guess Don took the challenge and said, yeah, okay. And then he went through with it. He bought the store and then approached the Hansens and D.B. Reinhardt, the owner of Gateway Foods, about folding that into the Quick Trips that had already opened at the time, which I believe at the time were 6 total, all very small, all around Eau Claire. And they entered into an agreement together to split ownership amongst each other and run the new chain, which was just beginning.
Wow, that's all really interesting. What did you learn from the people that you spoke with? Why is Quick Trip so popular today?
Yeah, there's a lot of different factors. Quick Trip has a fresh food program that it launched in the mid-2000s at the time that when gas stations were really suffering from the decline in cigarette sales. That was sort of a cornerstone across the industry for years. And when that went down, Quick Trip decided that it was going to be a place for fresh food. So they ended up sort of building out this really impressive within the industry vertical integration. So if you don't know, Quick Trip owns dairy, it owns its own bakery, it owns all these production facilities, largely in La Crosse, where it makes a bunch of the food that you buy at Quick Trip. And then all the things that they make at their own production facilities are transported by Quick Trip drivers. They go through 2 Quick Trips, they're sold at Quick Trips, and this allows the company to hold sort of control over everything. They can make sure that every location is getting the same sort of level of service, which you're not necessarily going to get at the big chains. And so that sort of consistency is a big part of it, and the uniqueness of having their own branded food sort of sets it apart. Another huge thing, this is something that came up whenever I talk to just like fans of Quick Trip and ask them why they care about this place so much, why they would go to it over other places. It's customer service. Quick Trip really prides itself on being sort of a step above other convenience stores when it comes to the way employees treat people. One very noticeable aspect of that is every time you leave, they're going to say, "See you next time." That's something that every person who works at Quick Trip is trained to say. That's part of what they're trying to do to sort of make the experience as pleasant as possible for people. And a lot of that also has to do just on the business end with more competitive pricing. I spoke to a professor at UW-Madison who explained that when people go to Quick Trip, they're not just paying for, say, a coffee or a donut. They're paying for coffee in a clean, well-lit store where everyone's going to be nice to them and they're going to get in and out quickly, not stuck in a long line. So that level of convenience and friendliness is a huge part of it. And the friendliness also is one of the sort of Wisconsin aspects of it. It's something that they play up a lot in their marketing too, the idea of sort of being a Midwest nice place. They definitely want to sort of market themselves as having a certain sort of small business feel, which obviously can be a little bit ironic because they have, I believe, over 900 locations. I think they just hit 900 earlier this year.
So big theme is quality control and customer service. And you mentioned a couple of names. I was wondering if you could tell me about who previously and currently runs the company. What did you learn about them?
Yeah, so Don Zietlow, who I mentioned earlier, has really been the face of Quick Trip since he became sole owner. Well, the Zietlow family did in 2000. He retired in 2022, and the company was taken over by his son, Scott. But he's very much carried it in the same direction for the past 3 years. One thing that came up when we started reporting on this that's pretty well known, at least among folks who are politically minded, is Don Zietlow is well known as a Republican donor. He's donated, I believe, over $1 million in total to different Republican causes, both at the state level and nationally. He has donated to, I think, a Trump election PAC, some of the local gubernatorial races, things like that. And for folks of the other political persuasion, that's definitely rubbed them the wrong way and has occasionally sort of been attributed to Quick Trip. I asked the folks at Quick Trip about that because that reputation is something that you'll find online or even just talking to people about it. And they were kind of quick to point out that Don's donations were his private donations. They weren't company money. The company has given some money to the legislative committees, both on the left and the right, with a bit more going to the right. But it's nowhere near Don's private donations. And then one thing that the folks I talked to at the company pointed out when I asked about this was that Scott, who is now the CEO, Don's son, does not donate to political causes like his father did. So, the company, to an extent, sort of distances itself from that political activity. But yeah, it's certainly, if you look online about Quick Trip, it's something that you're going to see. And yeah, it's definitely affected folks' perception of the company.
Okay, so my big question for you is, why aren't there any Quick Trips in Milwaukee? I felt a little bit of FOMO learning about people's experiences at Quick Trip.
Yeah, that was a big question that we had deciding to do this story. Because, yeah, there aren't any. The nearest, as of last I checked, was in West Allis. And I asked them about that. And according to them, the rationale is because they have this really big fresh food program and that requires more space. They require, I believe, a minimum of a 3-acre lot for every Quick Trip. And according to them, that's not cost effective in metropolitan areas. So they don't plan on opening one in Milwaukee. I mean, if you look online, folks speculate that Maybe it has something to do with their right-leaning company history that, obviously Milwaukee's an urban center that's been blue for decades. And so folks have thought maybe that's a factor. One thing that could possibly play into it is that many Quick Trips also sell alcohol. And Milwaukee, if I remember right, has an ordinance that prevents gas stations from also selling alcohol, which could be a factor in deterring Quick Trip from opening within the city.
So, Archer, before we wrap up, I wanted to mention that you reviewed some Quick Trip food items in your feature, and I thought I'd end by asking you the best thing you tried and the very worst. So let's start with the best thing.
Yeah, definitely. Probably the most fun part of the whole story. And it wasn't just me. We had a bunch of folks from the MilMag offices trying different Quick Trip foods. But the best, in my opinion, was the maple waffle breakfast sandwich. I mean, I love a good breakfast sandwich to begin with. But yeah, this was genuinely good in a way that you wouldn't expect for something you picked up while, getting gas in the morning.
And what about the worst?
Unfortunately, I have to say the grilled cheese that we tried was not great. Very sort of coagulated, not quite the the melt factor that you want in a grilled cheese. That was probably the most disappointing of the ones we tried.
Well, Archer, thank you so much for speaking with me today and sharing your work with me.
Yeah, thank you.
Archer Parquette is the managing editor at Milwaukee Magazine. He spoke with Lake Effect's Excret Nunez back in November. That's when his article about Quick Trip was featured in Milwaukee Magazine. And that wraps up the show for today. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. If you've missed any of Lake Effect this week, you can find all of our conversations at WUWM.com. If you'd like to take the show on the go, download the Lake Effect podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. 1 in 4 adults in Milwaukee have limited reading skills. Tomorrow on Lake Effect, we'll talk with literacy services about how they work with adults and also deal with the stigma that comes with seeking reading help as you're older. That's on tomorrow's Lake Effect, but for today, thank you so much for joining us right here on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.